Hi, folks. Great show for you today. I was joined by the Uneducated Economist. Uneducated, as you'll shortly see in name only. Bit of an ironic name at this stage. So his channel is all about street level thoughts, opinions, analysis, and perspectives from a working class point of view in relation to the economy. Now, this gentleman has built a rather sizable following on YouTube over the last few years. He's now over 50,000 subscribers, and he's done all this from the front seat of his car. And the funny thing was, as you'll see in our podcast chat discussion, he's actually doing it from the front seat of his car, just where he films his daily videos. So all sorts of hedge fund managers and different people at a really high level in finance and, who are interested in the economy follow the Uneducated Economist's channel for their, in order to help them keep the finger on the pulse as to what's going on in the economy and to, just make sure that people are steered in the right direction in a world where it's really, really difficult to get reliable information in this regard. So I just asked him to come on the show to help people understand the importance of different things, which they're probably not considering at the moment. One of the big things that the Uneducated Economist is big into is silver and protecting yourself by accumulating silver. And it's something that the ordinary person can actually get involved with, believe it or not, because it's as little as $25 at the moment for 1 ounce of silver. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about UBI, universal basic income. It's something that's really important at the moment because, in Simon's words, in the Uneducated Economist's words, it is coming. So, what's that all about? And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should we be resisting it? We'll sort of look at this. We'll talk about crypto, not just traditional cryptocurrency chat, but how to protect yourself from yourself if you're, in crypto or looking to get into it. We'll look at inflation. We'll look at deflation, get his thoughts on that. We even touch on prepping. We touch on other topics like bank bail-ins, the importance of the 10-year yield curve, and the importance of self-education compared to formal education and just relying on what you hear in the news and things like that. So there's much, much more. I'll do time splits in the video below. If you're new to the channel, I keep doing this mini tweak to this channel. So historically, it's been about faith, financial education, and health. And it sounds a bit messy, so I'm trying to kind of clean that up. I think we're going to go for faith, seeking faith, truth, and wisdom. So yeah, if you're a new person to the channel or one of the existing subscribers, I'd like your faith or your feedback on that. Faith, truth, and wisdom. It's just more clean and it kind of, still encompasses the same issues. But anyway, rambling too much. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, folks. So today I have the privilege of being joined by the Uneducated Economist. Rather ironic name these days, as I know. I think George Gammon was mentioning recently that there are different hedge fund managers and macro managers and things like this that are actually following Simon's channel at the moment. So great to have you on the show today, Simon. How's things?
Yeah, it's going really well. Thank you for inviting me on for a conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Really appreciate it. So I suppose your channel, it's that old adage of formal education will gain you a living, but self-education will gain you a fortune. Now, I know that on your show, you're not really trying to make a fortune for people, nor am I on my show, but it's more about just trying to kind of open people's eyes up to the crazy realities of the economic insidious system that we have at the moment, and trying to kind of unearth all the information as it comes to pass each week. So I suppose there's no one better than yourself to kind of when it comes to that self-education learning journey when it comes to economics. I suppose, would you like to just start by letting our listeners know how it is that you kind of came to be involved with economics and how you got into running your channel? And I suppose I know that you're doing this. You explained your kind of silver journey on the Pianimals podcast recently, but I think it would just be good for people to know. I think your example in terms of how silver worked for you as an insurance policy is a perfect way of people understanding how something like having something tangible like silver or gold, especially in really tough times, can be of real benefit. So
yeah. So ultimately, 12, 13, 14 years ago, I knew nothing of economics. I mean, I had a little bit of understanding about like silver, knew that our monetary, system had changed, back in the 60s, because I have these coins and I collected coins. I collect wheat pennies and stuff. But I'm in the middle of the great financial crisis. I'm losing my job. I'm losing my house, and my kid was born. And I'm like, man, what's going on here? I'm losing everything I have. I don't understand what's going on. And I would hear these people talking on TV. I would watch like CNBC trying to figure out, what's happened with the economy. And I would hear them talking about mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps. And I had no clue of what they were talking about. So I went to the computer and started Googling mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps, and started trying to wrap my head around what these things were. And a friend of mine had come to me, and I was talking to him about some of this stuff. And he had come to me and he says, hey, man, have you ever read The Creature from Jekyll Island? Here's this book. And so he gave me The Creature from Jekyll Island. Now, I have a reading disability where anything longer than, say, like 10 minutes or so of reading, and my mind just goes off wandering and I can't really pay attention.
I'm the same.
So having this book, and like The Creature from Jekyll Island, it's like 600 pages. It's super thick and it's really intimidating, considering that it's all about the Federal Reserve and such a boring topic. Going into such a thick book, I thought, man, there's no way I'm going to read this thing. But as I started thumbing through the book, I realized that, man, this stuff is really intriguing. So still new to the whole game, and having, my kid was just born. He was only a couple of years old at this point. People had given me some money saying, hey, this is for the kid, for buying diapers, formula, whatever. Well, I stashed all that money. I just kept holding on to it. Well, after I lost my job, I knew that if I didn't do something with that money, I was going to end up spending it. And that's when my the same buddy had come to me and he says, well, they have this coin shop down the road. Why don't you go down there and pick up a silver bullion? And, that might be a way that you can, transfer some of that money into, something that you can give to your kid later. And so I did that. I went down and bought one piece, and man, once you get your hands on one, the journey begins, and I just kept researching and kept buying. That's kind of what, started the whole, process of learning. The channel itself didn't come until November of 2017. And now that was pretty interesting because if you knew me personally, I talk a lot. And I'll come into work and I'm just babbling immediately. And everybody's just like, oh God, just shut up for a minute, And so I talk a lot, and I talk a lot about the things that I find as far as, what's going on in the economy. It's really intriguing and it's very confusing. And when I figured it out, I realized that when I explain it to people, I could explain it in a way that they could really grasp it and understand what was happening. And people told me, I was like, man, you should start a podcast or something. And I heard it for 2 weeks straight. I kept hearing people say this. So literally I grabbed my camera, grabbed my phone, I went down to my car, and I started the Uneducated Economist. I just made an introductory video, and that was it. I started making videos.
Yeah, that's really cool. I suppose, was it kind of, whenever you read that book, the Creature from Jekyll Island, was it kind of like, because I know for myself, I actually read a book called The Fruits of Graft by a guy called Wayne Jett, and I'm very similar to yourself. Like I would always listen to audiobooks or listen to podcasts or watch YouTube videos because I find it really, really difficult to kind of wade through a book. But this, I heard an interview with this gentleman, and he was talking about how FDR back in the late 20s, early 30s, he believed that basically FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was kind of the main person who actually caused and deepened the Depression because of his actions specifically relating to gold. So effectively, I don't know the specifics of what it was, but it was something like in the first 30 years of the 20th century, the United States bought more gold than basically ever had before. And it had more gold than anyone else, than any other country in the world, by far. And, the 1929 Depression hit, then it was just a crash. Then it was just a major recession. It only became a depression into the 30s. But basically they had, obviously at the time, they were on the gold standard, and the US dollar was in the gold standard. It's not been on it since the 70s, whenever Richard Nixon took it off. But then the US was in a scenario where there were literally people starving to death, and way more than you would typically hear about now. And the Treasury was in a scenario where it had all this gold, and FDR could have, if he wanted, monetized that gold and kind of stimulated the economy. But there are different specific things which Wayne Jett gets into in that book, the Fruits of Graft, where he shows through historical fact and what happened, all sorts of crazy things that FDR did in order to continue buying gold. And then there was some sort of like act that was passed in 1931 or 1932, whereby if you were holding gold as a US citizen, you legally had to give it in to the government. Oh. And then they kind of revalued it. So they basically diluted the value of a dollar by almost 50%. And then in the following years after that, FDR had policies where they then began buying gold from all around the world. So you were in a scenario where the government, in theory, was like incredibly wealthy, just sitting on this gold. Meanwhile, thousands of people were starving to death all around the world, all around the country. And, you know, it's only then from like 1929 to 1939 that you have this kind of really prolonged period where people have such a like low quality of life, low amount of income, real high levels of desperation. And then you can kind of, you know, like if you were basically to say that, oh, we're going to have a war with Germany here in 1928 or 1929, men would just say, no, I'm not going to war. But it's only after 10 years of kind of this horrible, you know, emasculating type of lifestyle that they had throughout the 30s that they were then able to be kind of encouraged by saying, oh, look, you can go to war and you can fight for the country and we can give you a decent wage, you know, a much better wage than you're going to get. So that book, I just heard Wayne Jett talking on a podcast about it, and I just thought, whoa, that's so fascinating. And it's so kind of unorthodox in terms of you don't hear this in the normal TV or media. That I had to order that book. I actually got this Kindle behind me to because it was cheaper to get the Kindle version of the book. But yeah, I get that. So yeah, was it like a eureka moment for you when you read the Creature of Jekyll Island, or was it just kind of bit by bit that you kind of came to the realization that things aren't what they are?
Well, I mean, I guess it was more of a confirmation to me, because I actually have a buddy who was a very hardcore conspiracy theorist, and it was really hard talking to him at times, because sometimes he would just be talking on things that were so far over your head and so ridiculously sounding that you just kind of quit paying attention to him. So after I started reading that book, I had to go back to him, and I'm like, man, you were so right. You know,
yeah.
Saying, you know, about, you know, like the money being, and, you know, like whatever. So I had to go back and, like, you know, apologize to a lot of the stuff that, you know, for not paying attention to him. So it was more of like a confirmation on a lot of stuff that I had really heard. But yeah, it really did. After I read that book, it was like, okay, you got to really start paying attention to what the Federal Reserve's actions are. And I think it was probably that was probably the same time that I lost my love for politics too. You know, I used to really like get involved. I used to really like the whole, you know, get into like the law measures and everything that you know, the different politicians would say, and, you know, the different sides and debates and stuff like that. And I used to be really like into that stuff. And man, I look back on that and I'm like, man, how ridiculous was all that stuff? What a waste of time and energy to think about.
Yeah.
Because none of that stuff made any difference in my life. It was when I started realizing how the monetary system works, what the Federal Reserve is, what they're doing, that it was that, you know, view that really started making an impact on my life and the way that I handle my finances and stuff like that. So yeah, it was definitely an aha moment, especially when I handed it to my mom and when she started reading it, because she got about halfway through the book and she says, you know what, I don't like this. You know, I don't like what I'm reading. I don't like the feeling I get from it and stuff like that. And I said, well, that's cool, Mom. Don't read the rest of the book. You know, I mean, I got this. This was like long before I had the channel and stuff like that. So I know, like, that feeling that you get after you realize some of this stuff out there is really gut wrenching. Like, it can really put a knot in your stomach and bring some depression on. I try not to look at it that way. To me, like, it's no longer depressing to have this information. To me, it's more of just knowledge and knowing and just being part of, like, the condition. It's like, you know, you can out there, like I've used the river as an example. I'm right here next to the Columbia River, and right now there's no boats out there. There's nobody out there and enjoying it. It's raining, it's stormy out. Nobody likes to be out there in that kind of weather. Now, when the sun comes out, the place is loaded. There'll be all kinds of boats out there. So, but it's not a matter of being out there during the nice weather, because anybody could go out there and be out there in the nice weather and be safe. Mm-hmm. But it's being out there every single day and to understand the conditions that you're in order to navigate through it. And if you just want to go out there on nice days and say, hey, look how great of a boater I am, or look how I can operate out here on the river, you're not really playing the game, because you need to be out there in the storms too. So to me, it's just a matter of just navigating through it every single day.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to touch on politics really, but one thing that happened for me whenever I just because of what you mentioned before, when I started to understand a bit more about the overall macroeconomic, the systems of the world, and how, you know, there's so many special interests that are influencing things politically, regardless of your political affiliation, whether the party's leaning on the right or leaning on the left. I think that there's no surprise, no coincidence that the more people typically know and follow economics, the more disenfranchised they become with the entire system, and the more they kind of seek to create a world where there's like more limited government, more, because at the moment, like I don't think it matters whether it's the United States, whether it's here in Ireland. I think just in general around the world, governments are increasingly getting larger scope, more invasive into people's day-to-day lives. You know, public spending is at a higher percentage of like national income than it ever has been in history, and it's kind of like getting in a dangerous direction. So, yeah, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's ultimately why I started getting into gold and silver, was just to try and be away from the government itself.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I took on a libertarian mindset. Like, I think you can't help it. Like, once you learn the Federal Reserve System, and you learn about the banking system, you learn about, you know, debt-based fiat currencies, I really, like, I mean, if you have like I guess unless you have like some serious money in the game already, like, you know, you got all your money tied up in a particular direction that you need to continue to go that way. But if you're like somebody like me who really doesn't have anything, and you don't really have anything to lose, libertarian mindset is pretty much where you're at.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, like having gold and silver was what's kind of separated you from the government. Like, you know, they can go ahead and tax and do whatever to your wages, but they really can't do anything to a physical item that you have in your possession. And that's where, like, I really started loving the metals for it, is because it was separated from everything else. It's just like, I could take this, put it in a box, and anything the rest of the world could burn, but the box is still there, you know? So
yeah,
that's really what, like, that's what drove me to the metals, was to separate myself from everything, from the banking system, from the government. Now I feel that, like, cryptocurrencies, or, you know, just the digital ledger systems in general, like the whole, you know, digital assets, I feel that tokenizing everything is eventually going to happen into the future. Now, I know a lot of people are like, man, this is the most draconian thing that could ever happen. Probably, like, you know, the amount of surveillance and control that would happen if everything was tokenized would definitely be there, but then there also would be less relevance for government. You know, you really wouldn't need them as much. You wouldn't really need court systems as much, since you have like smart contracts fulfilling the obligations. It really, you know, doesn't leave anybody up for question. Like, you don't have to go to, like, you know, to a judge and say, hey man, he didn't fulfill the contract. It's a smart contract. It's going to happen one way or the other. So to me, like, it would alleviate a lot of the problems inside of like the legal systems. It would solve a lot of problems with, like, you know, like the government intrusiveness, fraud, just a lot of things that are occurring right now would change. Of course, it would be, like I said, it would be very, you know, draconian in nature as far as like the surveillance part of it, but also it would alleviate a lot of the stress that is put on us, you know, mainly with just the way things are just system with this archaic way of going about it. You know, show up for court and explain yourself, stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is going to go away.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. It's a very optimistic way of looking at it, but I'll join you in being hopeful there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is like, I mean, it is an optimistic way of looking at it, but that's kind of the way I have to look at things. Because if you look at things negatively, then you're not going to have any positive reactions coming from, you know, it's like everything is negative out there. What you're going to get back is going to be negative. You have to put positive out to get positive back.
Yeah, with you. So I suppose just back on the silver side again, because I know that for anyone listening to this who has like never even considered buying any gold, buying any silver, Buying gold is obviously much less accessible to the ordinary person, because for an ounce of gold, it's, I don't know, something like $1,600-1,700 now. Silver is, what's it, low 20s at the moment or something like that?
I think before I fired up the video, I was looking at it at like 20, 25, high 25, low 26.
Well, on that, first of all, one thing that you do really well, and one thing that I think is kind of where a lot of people who are like gold and silver bulls have a bit of a weakness, like an Achilles heel, is, whenever there was things moved up there a couple of weeks ago with silver, and people are suddenly making all these videos saying, oh, silver squeeze, get on the silver squeeze, we're shooting up to the moon here, and all these sorts of things. And these are guys who are macroeconomic experts, who understand the intrinsic value of gold and silver, who have been talking about it for years, and then suddenly, as soon as silver shoots up by 10-20% in a few days, they become traders. They're looking at the charts, and they're talking a real technical analysis type deal. And it's like a head and shoulders pattern here, and you hear all this sort of stuff. And it's kind of like, guys, the whole rationale for you getting this thing in the first place is out the window whenever you start going down that route. You're holding it because it's an insurance policy against the whole system crumbling down. And really, you don't even want, I think you mentioned this before, you don't actually want to see the day where your gold or silver becomes worth loads of money, because that basically means that shit's hitting the fan and things are going completely terribly wrong in society. So just in terms of the ordinary person, like, would be like 1 ounce of silver is, say, $25 now, approximately. So whether you might be able to do it this week, but at some stage, most people could, if they wanted, start slowly accumulating silver coins. Now, I know to get the actual physical silver, there's a premium now, and there's always a premium, but the premium's higher than normal now, and there's so much demand and not that much supply at the moment. It's more difficult to get. But what would you say to people who, in terms of like just understanding the insurance policy side of it and the rationale for getting to holding some silver, like, why would people do it?
Well, there's going to be a lot of reasons that people are going to do this. Now, ultimately, for me personally, it was the insurance policy part of it. It was something that I knew that I had to do with my money. I had to put it into something to keep me from spending it, because I was running out of it. And I felt like it was my kid's money. And actually, I have that silver set aside for my kid. This is his, and then I have mine that I plan on giving to him when he grows up. But, as far as like the individual person going, oh, what do I do starting today? I personally would not go out and dump lots of money into silver. That is not the way to go about it. If I was like the very first going off to get don't own any silver, I would go and buy one piece. I would go and buy one piece anywhere. Doesn't matter if you get it off the internet, going down to the coin shop, get it from a friend of yours, just get one piece. Try not to pay too much over spot price for it. If it's something like an American Silver Eagle, or like the Canadian Maple Leaf, or some kind of government issued, and if you're not familiar with these things, it's you're going to have to learn them. You have to go on the internet and learn the difference between government issued and generic, and why there's a difference. Once you learn the difference between the two, then you'll understand why you're buying government issued as opposed to generic. The government issue has a recognition to it, like you can see that it's definitely that piece. The purity of it, you don't have to question about it. Generic pieces, you may have to question. It's just like, is this fake or not? There's some very like recognizable generic pieces out there, so really you have to know the difference between the two. When you do buy one right now, like you're saying, the premiums are very high. So even though the spot price is at $25, $26, you may end up paying $32 for this American Silver Eagle. If that's what you end up doing, don't stress it. Just buy the one piece. Don't pay $50 for it. If you pay, 30 or 32, that ends up being what it is, but don't stress it. Once you get it home and you have it in your hand and you hold on to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll know the feeling. Once you have that real money in your hand, you will know the difference between that and paper. And the feeling that you get from it will tell you, I need to have 2 pieces, or I need to have 4, or I need to have 8. And then pretty soon you'll be clinking them together, and you'll be thinking about like what's going on in the economy, and you'll be like, looking down at that going, man, these things just went up. I have 8 coins in my hand. Yesterday they were worth, $200. Today it's worth 210. Yeah. And that's the
feeling. Out of Lord of the Rings.
And so you're playing with it, and you can't help but to naturally hope that the price is going to go up. You know, you're thinking, okay, it's going to be $30, it's going to be $50, going to be $150, and I'm going to be so wealthy off of this stuff because the system is crashing all around me. If you have that belief, you are going to make a terrible trade, because I guarantee you when it gets up to $50 or $100, you're going to be like, I'm in the money, and you're not going to sell because you're thinking like you're the smartest person in the world. And silver is incredibly volatile, and they don't call it the devil's metal for nothing. And if you do not sell it, it will take it right back down to where you started, or maybe even below that. And you're going to feel like you have made a very terrible trade. So if that's what happens, you probably should have dollar cost averaged in, buying one piece a week, every other week, once a month. Don't stress about what you paid for it. Don't add it up. Don't think about it. Don't look about how much you have invested into it. Just look to see how many ounces you have, because that's ultimately what it's going to mean in the end, right? It doesn't matter how much you paid for it. If you bought it for $32 an ounce or $38 an ounce or $50 an ounce, really isn't going to make a big difference if you're selling it for 150.
Yeah.
So ultimately, when I look at silver, I don't look at it anymore like it's going to go up to $150. I don't really care if it does. What I'd really like for silver to do is stay down around $20 so I can just keep accumulating as much as I can. Because if things go bad, I have the silver. And if things go bad, the silver most likely is going to go up in value for its trading capabilities and stuff. So me personally, I want to see silver stay down until I'm 80 years old. And then when I'm 80 years old, I would love to see it pop up to like $200 an ounce, and then I'll sell all my stuff, retire, and live off of retirement stuff.
Yeah.
But until then, I just want a box that I have secured, that I can take with me, that I don't have to stress about, like, what's happening inside of the economy. I get to sleep at night, and that's the whole point of it, is to have that insurance policy. Ultimately it paid off for me when my cars broke down. Like, I had a vehicle breakdown. I was living way out in the country, and I had to get to work. And if it was a half an hour drive to get to my job. There was no way I could walk. I would either have to catch a ride from somebody or figure it out. And knowing that I was stuck out there and with no vehicle, I called up my buddy and I said, "Hey man, you still got that car for sale?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Will you still take silver?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Will you please bring it up to me?" And he says, "I'll be up there in a few minutes." And 15 minutes later, he was handing me a title, and I was sliding some silver tubes over to him. I think I traded like something like 165 ounces. And I was so bummed out that I had to unload that much silver, and I was like kind of mad about it. And I got into that new car to me, got into my car, and I thought, that was pretty cool. Man, so glad I had that silver, and I'm back off and running. I'm going to work, and I'm stacking them back up again. And luckily, like, I had traded it off when it was like at around $17.50 an ounce or something. And when it dropped down to 15, I was able to pick up some more. So really, it was just a little bit of time where I didn't have it. And yeah, I was thankful. I was very thankful I had that box of silver.
Cool. And I'm going to give you like a backhand compliment here. So it's a pretty damning state of affairs when the most, like, if you want to find out the truth in terms of what's going on in the economy, one of the best things you can do is go on YouTube and go and watch this guy chilling in his car, because he'll tell you what's going on. And it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be like that in planet Earth, where we're getting our reliable information through that mechanism. You know what I mean? So like, where do you get most of your information from, or where do you generally consume it? And what are your thoughts in terms of how economic information is provided on mainstream media? Like, what do you think of that in general?
No, I very much agree with you. A guy sitting in his car talking economics, who didn't go to school, doesn't really know anything about it, didn't, not finance, not any reason to have this much knowledge about it, is sitting here on YouTube talking about these, high level economic conditions. Yeah, it leads me to believe that the system is probably not going to last much longer, right? I mean,
You're really good at it, though. I'll tell you that, but
that's not right. I think about it in the same sense that, plywood right now that I used to sell for, $16 a sheet, I now sell for $50 a sheet. And I'm thinking, that's not right. That's not going to last. So yeah, it's cool that the internet right now has really changed the way things are. You're right. There's no reason that I should have this much knowledge not being involved in it in any other form, just this. But that's what's also cool, is that phone, that Google will teach you anything you want to know. Mm-hmm. It will teach you anything. I mean, there is nothing out there that is a secret anymore, if you just choose to go out there and just research it yourself. So you can learn to do brain surgery off of Google, mm-hmm. right? So there's no stopping it. Having a platform for me to speak at is something that never existed years ago. I would have had to try and accumulate the credibility from a whole audience, and then get them to buy tickets into a theater in order to, to put my voice out there. Now I can just blast it out there all day long for free, on a platform. So I think it's the conditioning, or the condition in which we live in now, that really is exposing this all out there. I know that if I'm doing this, then there's got to be hundreds and thousands of people out there across the world who are just like me, sitting, at their job, doing their thing with the knowledge of what's going on in the economy that's just as high as mine is. And to think that there's other people out there with that much knowledge, I can't imagine that the system can function in the way that it did in secrecy before. That I think that's coming to an end. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm believing so much in the cryptocurrencies and the tokenizing and stuff like that, is because I just feel that that's the direction it's going to head into.
Cool. So you mentioned your full-time work, because I was speaking with Stephen Van Meter. I came on the show a couple of weeks ago. Don't know if you're familiar with him, but it's funny. It's like, a lot of the guys, like say Lynette Zhang and ITM Trading, and let me think of who else, Mike Maloney, Peter Schiff, these people are more in this sort of hyperinflation and inflation's coming camp, and that's good for precious metals. Stephen is an example of someone who's more in the deflation camp. Now, I'm not saying that people are in their extremes. Everyone can see that there's different scenarios can potentially unfold, and everyone's trying to like doggedly work out exactly what it is that the Fed's doing, and how that's going to actually impact things. But so Stephen Van Meter, as one example, was pretty firmly in the deflation camp in terms of where things are going to head. But from being on the ground that, well, especially whenever it comes to say building houses or something like that, definitely raw materials, there's definitely inflation going on there, because the costs of the actual goods that are needed to create things are going up, and exponentially so it's kind of, we're in a scenario where it's like, yeah, there could be inflation there certainly will be inflation in terms of different raw materials that are needed and food and things like this, but then there may also be deflation in the economy. So what are your thoughts on the inflation deflation kind of camp?
Yeah, this is I love this conversation, because it really depends on what kind of timeline you're thinking about. Like, how far out is it going to go? Because eventually everything ends in a hyperinflation scenario. Okay. But to me, like, it's not a question of whether or not there's inflation or not inflation coming. The inflation is, I think it was best described by Peter Schiff, is the expansion of money and credit. I mean, this is the argument that he has given, like, as long as I have listened to him. Inflation is already here. We already have the inflation. The expansion of money and credit has already occurred. So the argument of whether or not we have inflation is futile. It's already happened. What we don't see is the Federal Reserve saying that they are seeing the price inflation like they are expecting it. So really, we're not arguing about whether or not there's inflation. We already have that. Really, the argument comes from whether or not the Fed is seeing it, and why they aren't seeing it, or what they are going to see in order to react to it. Because it doesn't matter whether or not we have inflation. That argument's already there. We already determined that one. The argument really comes down to, what is the Fed going to do about it? Okay. That's really where it comes down to. And so the inflation deflation camp, I mean, you got all the money printed, so eventually that's going to end up in the system. There's no way that it can't. It has to end up in there. And then when that does, then you're going to have the hyperinflation scenario. But at the same time, things are based off of an interest rate that is sitting around zero. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is really where Dr. Lacey Hunt and his argument starts to come into play, because really what he is talking about is the money velocity. That all this money, even though it's been printed, isn't changing hands. It's not going anywhere. Like, you can print up $100 million quadrillion dollars, but if it's just sitting in a bank and not going anywhere, then it doesn't make any difference. It's not part of the system, part of things. And so I think that argument with Dr. Lacey Hunt talking about how interest rates have come down so low that the return on capital investment has gone negative or gone zero, that the money velocity is not going to pick up, and therefore the deflation will continue no matter how much money you print up. And I think a good way to kind of understand that, and at least the way that I kind of grasp the idea of it, is that back in the early 80s, if you like came into $1 million, like, hey man, you just inherited $1 million. What are you going to go do with your $1 million? You could go down and buy 10-year treasuries with it and get paid like $150,000 a year from the interest rates that 10-year treasuries. That's a pretty decent living, like especially in the early 80s. You didn't have to do anything. All you had to do was just loan the money to the government. Nowadays, you loan the government $150 or $1 million in a 10-year treasury, and you're going to get what today is a little bit higher, $15,000. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not really that great. Like, you don't get to go spend that money into the economy. So like loaning the government money is really like counterintuitive. You won't be able to live off of it by the time you get your money. It actually has less purchasing power to it. So interest rates being as low as they are is slowing the money velocity down. It's keeping the capital investment from having a return. When you borrow money and you put it towards something, if you do not put it towards something that not only pays back the principal plus like a return on it, like, you buy a tractor, the tractor pays for itself and then starts providing even more money for you because it does so much more work. But if you buy a vacation, you don't get anything back from that. You have to just pay it off. So the money is flowing into like consumable stuff, but it's not flowing into things that are going to have a return on capital for it. And to me, that's probably the biggest issue and why we're probably not going to see the hyperinflation scenario like these other guys are talking about, because the money velocity being as low as they are. However, we see the interest rates changing, that might start picking the money velocity up, and then we'll start seeing that inflation that the guys are talking about. So those are the two that I kind of keep an eye out for. And yeah, I don't look at like, how much money the Federal Reserve has printed. I just kind of look at where the interest rates are and how that is going to react to the money velocity effects.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm in both camps, I guess. And also I hate to say this about like, Peter Schiff and Mike Maloney and these other guys, because I learned more from those guys than anybody. I mean, I sat around and watched hundreds of hours of Peter Schiff and Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money. Are brilliant, absolutely brilliant pieces for people who are trying to learn about what's going on inside of the economy and the money system. Those two guys are, I mean, I can't brag them up enough, but they're both salesmen. Mm-hmm. They're both trying to sell their gold. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, if that's what you are trying to do in the end, then you are not going to give them information that will discourage them from buying gold and silver. So all that information is a sales tactic, even though it's chock full of good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty profound. No, I'm the exact same. Like I watched that Hidden Secrets of Money. It was the first time I actually listened to, it was called Gold Silver, Mike Maloney's audiobook. And I would recommend that to anyone. If you're going to like listen to one audiobook, and I get like one free Audible credit a month. So that was like the first one that I got was Gold Silver. And that taught me so much about not just those gold and silver, but just the history of economics, really. So anyone can listen to that, and it's really good quality listening. And same with Peter Schiff. But yeah, it's just funny whenever you see, again, though, people having like I kind of feel like both of them, I really want both of them to be vindicated at some stage, because they've been doing it for so long, yep. And they're completely correct in everything that they're saying. But it's just the fact that the financial system is so insidious, and there have been so many different levers pulled to kind of kick the can down the road and down the road and down the road and down the road, that, has ended up with them kind of just waiting and waiting and waiting and growing older in the process. So no doubt they'll be vindicated at some stage, but
they really are. But you're right about like the Federal Reserve. We do not know what games that they have in play. And a lot of people say they're not that smart, they're control or whatever. I don't think so. I think they're very much in control, very much exactly what's happening. Yep. And I think that they have plans for any kind of scenario that comes up. So when they say when the Federal Reserve loses control, when they finally lose control or whatever, okay, maybe that may happen down there in the future. But I bought my first piece at 18, watched it run up to 50, thought for sure it was happening, and then followed it all the way back down into the teens and was completely underwater and hated those guys for it. And then I realized later it was just like they didn't know what was going to come. It's not like prove it, or they had any idea that the Federal Reserve was going to be, going into quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then whatever they do. It's just like none of this stuff is foreseen. So when I thought about silver being like my investment that I'm gonna retire rich with, after all that kind of went place, and it was like, okay, wait a minute, it's not your investment, that's your insurance policy. Stop stressing about it.
Yeah.
Silver and gold is the only place you ought to be. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I suppose Mike Maloney actually has always had like 10 or 20% of his portfolio for the last 10 years has been in crypto and Bitcoin. So he's kind of more open to the idea. But it's kind of like, I feel bad because, again, I've learned so much from Peter Schiff, but it's like man's become a meme because he's just so anti-Bitcoin. It's like, man, it was 3,000 less than a year ago. It's now over 50,000 or near 50,000. It's like at some stage you just got to be like, listen, should have bought some or should have, you don't have to just necessarily keep being so bullheaded. But anyway, yeah, again, learned so much from him, so we'll not slate him too much.
Yeah, no, Peter Schiff has commented on my channel a couple of times, and I was just like, he corrected me, like he was like, "You're wrong on your video." He said, "I'm like, oh yeah, correcting me, yes."
That's funny. That's cool, but again, that is the beauty of the communication method that the internet has provided. You can kind of you can start rambling yourself, and then you get great at something, and then people just you can link in with anyone in the world then. One suppose last thing that I know that you've done a bit of a deep dive into recently, and I'm I think everyone should be more interested in this, is universal basic income, because I know that they're looking to push this. I say they, no one ever, I don't know who they is, right? But I know that, the powers that be, let's say, and because I know that it's the same here in Ireland, UK based, I'm technically in Northern Ireland, it's UK system. It's very similar to what's happening in the US at the moment. And we're definitely heading in this direction of UBI. And one thing that, I've only started my research on this, but I can see more kind of, there's a lot of people who think it's a really good idea, basically. And, if that's the case, I have only looked at the pros for it. I haven't looked at the cons yet. So that's why I kind of want to ask you about it. But I know that there's going to be a major fight on our hands globally to resist it if it needs resisting. So what are your general conclusions in terms of all the research you've done on it?
The research that I've done on it, I've pretty much come to the conclusion that it is an inevitability coming into the future, especially if the rates end up going negative. Now, right now we're seeing the rates ticking up, and so you're not going to hear a whole lot of talk about like negative interest rates, but there will be negative interest rates at some point. The interest rates will stop rising as far as the bonds go, they'll reverse, and then everything probably will end up going negative. Everything will end up getting tokenized. Everything will go that way. Cryptocurrencies, digital, central bank digital currency, stuff like that. All that stuff is going to be implemented before the UBI will be full on. The only problem that I'm really seeing with UBI right now, well, it's not the only problem, but one of the major problems is that they do these testing. They'll pick the community, and they'll say, hey, we're going to pick the people in this community, and we're going to give them $500 a month for them to spend whatever they want, and there's not going to be, and then we're going to sit back and watch and see how well that affects them. And I think to myself, well, yeah, if you take 400 people in a community and you give them an extra $500 and you think, is this going to make their life better? I can tell you, yes, it will, no doubt.
Yeah.
Right? You put them inside of a situation everybody around doesn't have it. So yeah, they're going to be far better than their people next to them. I mean, why wouldn't they? Now, if you give everybody in that community $500, nothing's going to change, right? Now, that whole community might do a little bit better comparatively to the communities around them. But again, you take them and you've given everybody inside of that community $500. And if you compare them to people who don't get $500, yeah, they're going to look a lot better. But then if you give all the communities $500, it's not going to make any difference. So that's the whole point of UBI, is to try and say, hey, we're going to lift everybody up. We're going to give them the $500 that they need in order to survive with. But the $500 doesn't make any difference if every single person gets it. It doesn't. It will for a minute. Like everybody will be bragging. It's like, look how great it does. Yeah, it does fine until that money actually enters the system. You start doing this every single month for, a year. Pretty soon, all the prices will be up to elevated to the point that everybody can afford them. And it doesn't do any good. Now you have to increase UBI in order to make up for the fact that
maybe that will actually be the catalyst that leads to the hyperinflation, potentially.
Well, if you look at the UBI and you look at the modern monetary theory, they're basically going to say no. They're going to pull it out on the other end, right? So they're going to tax and do everything else to try and prevent all this stuff from happening. Now, that much need for control and governance, I just don't feel is going to end up working out very well. But if you do it in like a cryptocurrency kind of fashion, where it's just like they don't really have any other choice, like everything is tokenized and it's already set, then, maybe it would function. But as far as like UBI being like a benefit that's going to lift everybody up out of like poverty or something like that, I doubt it. It might work for like a little bit as people like, start to feel the benefits of this spreading around of wealth. But once that wealth is spread around, it's diluted and it doesn't do anything. I mean, right now, why are there people still sitting on the streets hungry? I mean, they give food cards to everybody. I see everybody has one in their hand, right? Why is there still hunger on the streets? You gave food to everybody because it doesn't work. You can go ahead and give out everything you want, but it doesn't matter how much you give away. It's a matter of how much an individual can earn for themselves. That's really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. There's no magic when it comes to being a producer and a server. I mean, that's what you do. And if you stand there and not do anything, then how is it that you're supposed to be able to provide for yourself? Like, it's just like, I need food, I need shelter, I need clothing and all this other stuff, but I can't do it for myself. Like, I can't provide those things for myself. If everybody else in the world starts accumulating their little bit of money and starts handing it to you, and they start handing it to everybody out there, that'll dilute out, and the efforts that they give out will be less effective. Meaning that, you can get $100 and you're going to go down and maybe be able to get a sandwich with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how much do you need now? Now you need $150 and you can get a sandwich and a soda pop. Yeah. And this is where it'll just keep going. It's just like, this isn't enough. Now you need $200. Now you need $250. Now you need, ever increasing amounts of this stuff, because it'll never be enough to provide. Ultimately, what it needs to be is that everybody gets nothing, and the producers and savers will be able to, provide for themselves, be able to work in an environment where they don't have competition, stuff like that. There's a lot of suffering and badness that comes from that, but ultimately that's where the individual has the best success possibilities, is when they don't have that competition of government saying, well, yeah, you're working real hard, keep doing that, but we're going to give to this other person who isn't doing anything, and they're going to live just as well as you are. I mean, yeah. How much ambition does that leave to the producer and saver? None. So you're not going to have anything. You're going to have less products and less services out there.
Yeah, it's the same if they do like a massive ramp up in terms of income taxes as well. It'll also create that disincentive. It'll ruin the incentive for people to actually be productive.
Oh, I hear it all the time. They should tax the rich. And I'm like, you know what? I'm poor as hell. I would love to be rich someday. I don't want to be taxed.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like, I would love to be there someday. People who are saying tax the rich, and I'm like, wouldn't you like to be rich someday? Do you really want to have that much discouragement as you try to achieve the higher levels?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. I wanted to make it easy on me. I want to achieve that level with the least amount of resistance as possible. But a lot of people don't see that. They're stuck down on the bottom, and they're thinking, no, I'm poor and I need somebody else to provide for me. And it's unfortunate that that's like, kind of a society that we live in right now, that, they look at this abundance up there and they feel like they have some sort of right to it. And to me, it's just like, I don't have any right to it. What I want is the right to achieve that with little interference,
100%. Let me think. So yeah, there was one funny video you made a couple of weeks ago, I suppose, last thing in terms of an addition to prepping in the silver sense. Last thing on silver as well is, Well, if they do that scenario where there is a hyperinflation, that's why you want to be having, and they're giving out all the money, that's why you want to be having silver. Also, bank bail-ins, just a random kind of, I don't know if you've done a video on this before, but I was just looking up on this yesterday. In Cyprus before, there was a scenario where basically if you had any more money than 100,000 effectively in the bank, the government took it. They just took it. So, you know, there's different people are kind of suggesting that could happen again.
Yeah, like the reverse bailout things where they just kind of kept the depositors' money. It really, you know, that's a lot of where I don't think a lot of people understand is that when they hand their money over to a financial institution and they're thinking about their savings account, because it's like my savings account or whatever, you just lent your money out. You just like, you became an unsecured depositor, and people were like, well, it's insured. It's FDI insured, meaning that, you know, if the bank fails, then yes, you get your insurance money. But if 100 banks fail, you know, especially, or maybe not 100, but if some of these bigger banks fail, FDI insurance isn't going to be able to cover it all. So that's where, like, it really, like, I think a lot of people don't quite realize it when they're handing their money off. They are literally handing it off. You know, it's like, you know, it's going away.
But yeah, the other prepping side, sorry, I was going to mention was, you did a video a few weeks ago saying that you were going to better prepare your prepping effectively because of so I'm just calling you out here. Like, have you done what you said you were going to do?
That was.
Do you want to tell us that story quick?
Okay, yeah. So this is what happened. So I got like all the camping gear. I got everything, like, you know, like one would need to be, like, you know, prepared for like a disaster or something like that. Like, I got food and everything going on. But I had already planned this trip to go up to Portland. Now I live out on the coast, so Portland's like a 50-mile drive, right? It's not that far. But we knew the storm was coming. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go get changed for the car, stuff like that, make sure that I have everything that I can, you know, drive to Portland and back on. So I got all that prepared, and like being up in Portland, like I really wasn't ready to deal with the snow up there. It was a little bit of a nightmare trying to get the chains on the car and stuff like that. But once I got it all, you know, and moving, we drove back from Portland just fine. When we got back to the house, there was a huge ice storm here, and it took down a lot of trees, which took out a lot of power lines. And here in the Northwest, I mean, we have a lot of trees. So when the ice storm started to hit, I wasn't here, you know, I was up in Portland, but people were saying that it sounded like a war zone. They would hear like this loud pop, which would sound like a gunshot. That would be the branches breaking and then shattering glass, which was all the ice breaking off of the trees. And they said the entire town sounded like this. It was just this loud popping and glass shattering sound. So anyway, power lines were out all over the Pacific Northwest, and we didn't have any power for like 3 or 4 days. And so we would check, like, you know, the Pacific Power. They're like, hey, your power is going to be up here in about, you know, 12 hours or so. And we're like, okay, well, we'll just ride it out. No big deal. So I didn't I didn't have the equipment like ready to go. Like, you know, the camping stove is kind of buried out there in the garage, and, you know, I don't even know where the propane bottle is and stuff like that. Like, I wasn't ready to do this. And so I ended up like, you know, or like, well, the power will be back on here in, you know, 12 hours anyway. Let's go get something to eat. So we went to where they did have town, ordered some food. Well, the next day we still didn't have power. And they're like, well, it'll be on, you know, whatever, 3 o'clock in the next afternoon. Okay, well, right. Still didn't have power. And so it kept going on. And like, here it is, like the 3rd or 4th day, and I still didn't have power. And I realized, it was just like, man, I got all this stuff prepared that I could have like been living comfortably right now if I had just pulled it out and just dealt with it, if I had it all ready. So it's not a matter of like just having the preparations. It's actually being prepared and ready to use it at a moment's notice. I had it, but I wasn't ready to use it. I would have had to dug it all out, which I should have done. But I kept thinking that, no, they'll have the power back on. I kept relying on the idea that I was going to get, you know, the services back, and I never did. And so, yeah, relying on the services, even if they are promising them to you, is obviously not the place that you want to be. You want to be prepped and ready to go at a moment's notice at any given time. And I learned my lesson on that, because really having to eat out for 3 days was quite expensive, you know. And like, you know, like my stove and everything else where I could have cooked.
Yeah. Cool. Now, weirdly, I'm going to give you one real conspiratorial prediction type thing that could potentially tie in with the prepping thing as well. And I usually wouldn't say something like this because I know the algorithms don't like it, but our friends who are, let's say, the global economic body, which is pushing for the grand restart, we'll say, keep talking about doing preparedness tests for global cyber attacks. Now, I saw them in November saying that, oh, you know, the sickness that we've seen in the last 12 months has been awful for the economy, but something that would be exponentially worse would be if there was a global cyber attack. And, you know, whenever people like this say this, you're like, well, hang on, why are you saying this? What are you up to that you're saying this, you know? And then what I noticed was I saw like really, really small level cyber attacks happening in November, slightly bigger ones in December, slightly bigger ones in January. I was watching the golf. It was like PGA golf 3 weeks ago. And Rich Beam came on and he was saying, the US has been hit by a major cyber attack. I don't even know what it was at the time, but it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I've seen different people mentioning that, you know, especially with crypto, because so many people hold crypto these days, hold it on an exchange as opposed to holding it, you know, on a hard wallet or a cold wallet or something like that. So people, and again, Mike Maloney and Peter Schiff keep saying things like, if there's a scenario where like the internet shuts down, albeit briefly for like say 2 or 3 days, something like that, so many people could potentially lose whatever wealth they have in crypto if they haven't got it properly secured at the time. So I could see a scenario, and I'll tie this in. There's a faith element to my channel as well. There's prophecies saying about that have from Padre Pio and people like this in the past who have talked about 3 days of darkness. And I can just see a scenario where they somehow pull the plug on our kind of like global power supplies. And see if something like that happened. One, there's also, you're probably aware, so many different people that are talking about real dangers to the food supply chain and how like it is really vulnerable in different ways. But see if you do a scenario like that where people don't have power for 2 or 3 days, all food that anyone has in a fridge or freezer is gone. And then there's going to be like serious ramifications as a result of that. Also, that would be a perfect trigger for kind of like the financial crash that we know is going to come. And then also crypto and things like this, which are more leveraged, which are more exposed to the internet, could potentially be even more vulnerable again. So I'll just leave that wacky one with you, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Is there anything, I suppose, I know you want to focus more positively on things, but is there anything else that's, you know, on the tip of your tongue that's something that you're concerned with, or something that you think ordinary people should be more paying attention to and getting tuned into?
Well, you know, I would definitely be concerned about the cyber attack stuff, especially when it comes to your cryptocurrencies, because that's where it's all at, right? I mean, it's all stuck up there on the internet, and there's nowhere else, you know, that it's kept. Securing your private keys is absolutely critical. Now, I don't know if you've heard the story. I've actually lost cryptocurrencies, both to losing the private key and also to a crooked exchange. So I've experienced both of those. And I'm really bummed about losing the private key, because that is something that I have warned everybody against the moment that I had said, hey, if you ever get into cryptocurrencies, be sure and secure those private keys. I thought I had written them down. I have all but like the last 12 digits to an Ethereum wallet that has a bunch of coins in it that I cannot get to. So I can see that I got the public key, like I can see the coins in there and I can see it all moving around and stuff, but I can't access any of it. So you know, that's a real bummer to have that. And so, yeah, I always warn people, be sure to secure those private keys, learn it, like, you know, buy $100 or $10 or whatever, just a small amount of cryptocurrencies, and learn how to secure that thing. Like, you know, make sure that if the power goes out, if you lose your phone, if something happens, that you can get those dang coins back, because that's very critical to it. Now, the exchanges, yeah, when you, again, like, you know, same thing with your money, when you put it in your savings account, when you hand your cryptos over to an exchange, you're handing them over to an exchange that one day you may not be able to log into, like I did. I had sent a bunch over to, it was back when cryptos were first getting started. In fact, it was in fact, I remember, because it was like a week after Dogecoin had come out, that I had, or it was a week before, right around the same time that Dogecoin had come out, that I had the Cripsy account. Because I remember buying Dogecoin there. And I remember like thinking about what a joke it was. And there was a time when I had like 270,000 Dogecoin, right? And it was probably worth, like, you know, at the time it was probably $20. It wasn't like it wasn't worth anything. It was a joke at the time. Nobody even considered it to be a real thing.
It's still a joke, but it's just worth a lot more.
Right? But yeah, but now it has some it's not so joking. Okay. So anyway, Cryptsy shut down. Right. Like one day I go to log in, I'm like, okay, let's go play on the internet, and I'm like, I can't get in, and I'm like, what the hell? And then I see Big Vern has like his tweet up there saying that we got issues with a particular coin or whatever, technical difficulties, will be back up again and running. Well, no, he never was. And then FBI investigations and class action lawsuits and all this other stuff. And I'm like, so that was it? That I dug on. They're like, well, you can join the class action lawsuit. And I'm thinking, well, I had like $8 worth of cryptos up there. What, especially after the price had dropped after that, I was like, I'm like, what am I going to join in for to get $10? I'm not stressing it right now about that. I really wanted the cryptos. I just wanted my cryptocurrencies. That's really what I wanted, but I wasn't going to get it. So I just didn't stress it. I just let it all go. And I just keep the story behind it. But yeah, it was super easy to lose it. Super easy to lose my crypto. Now, I don't think I've ever lost a single ounce of silver.
Yeah.
Like I can't.
You'd have to go out of your way too.
Like I don't think I've ever lost. My wife has brought it, says, hey, you left this in your pants when they came out in the laundry. It's like, oh yeah, okay. So I lost it like that, but I've never like outright just lost like a whole bunch of silver, So yeah, I mean, being wary of the cyber attacks is definitely something I would be very concerned about, because everything is on computers now. Everything is tied up to it. If one day you cannot fire up your computer and you do not have cash in your pocket, what are you going to do? Like, it doesn't matter if it's cryptocurrencies or a debit card. Like, if the power is not on, you're screwed. Mm-hmm. And you better have something like cash or silver or tradable something. And if it ever was like super significant, like that ice storm was, then you better be prepared, and how to deal with that. And so like having a little bit of cash on hand, having some tradable silver, junk silver is awesome. Like the pre-65, 64 silver quarters and dimes. Those are awesome tradable items. I mean, they're recognizable. People like them. They're small. So,
do you know what else I just realized, and I never thought about this before, but silver is actually a good way of saving you from yourself. Because if you're the problem with the markets and the way markets work, if people think that they can, out trade the market or whatever, as opposed to just holding long term, what typically happens is after a crash, people will sell their crypto. They'll get frustrated, they'll throw the head up, they'll go on their phone or they'll go on the computer and they'll just sell it. If that happens in the silver market, you're not selling your silver. You're just frustrated. Your silver's just sitting in the house, but you're not going to just sell it in a second, online whenever you're not thinking straight. So it saves you from yourself just having those extra layers of complexity, I suppose.
It really does. And, again, like if you don't look at it, the silver, if you take it away from like the investment and move it more towards the insurance, you're not stressing about it when the price drops. You're just thinking, cool, I'm adding more to my insurance policy. So like I actually look forward to the price drops. Watching the yields rise on the 10-year right now is giving the buying opportunity into silver ever closer and closer. So yeah. If it wasn't for the fact that the premiums are so dang high, I'd be a little bit more excited about running down and trying to buy some right now. But I want to see it unloved. I want to see people like hating it. I want people say like silver is the worst thing that you could ever possibly do. Mm-hmm. When I hear that, that's when I run down and buy the most I can. Yeah.
That's the rule for any asset though. It's whenever you see euphoria, you run. You see euphoria and like people talking about moon and Lambos, you sell that thing. If people are saying this is dead, whatever it may be, that's when you want to be loading up. But it's that contrarian view to life,
Right? Buy low, sell high. It's not hard. I mean, it's just like, it's hard to do it because most people want to buy high and sell higher, but it's a matter of being patient. It's a matter of not being emotional. That's the other thing. Like I did that silver video the other day. I love silver with all my heart, but I ain't getting married. That was a lesson that I learned from Dave Morgan, the silver guru. When silver ran up to $50 an ounce, he said, I remember watching a video where he said that if there was any time that you would want to take money off the table, now is the time to do it. And I went to my buddy and I said, did you hear that Dave Morgan video where he said, like, now's the time to sell? He says, well, are you selling? I said, no, I'm not selling. And then I watched it go all the way down to 15. I thought, man, why didn't I sell it? Like the silver guru was saying, now's the time, and when it went all the way down and was following down, that's when he was saying, he goes, I want to date silver. I like silver just fine, but I ain't getting married. I'm not going to be married to silver. And so if there's time to let it go, there's time to let it go. And I won't ever forget that. And I thought, okay, well, I'll remember that next time it runs up real high, that you should probably take a little bit of money off the table if it's kind of, gone way up.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point, is just not be emotional with it. Same thing with cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. When it starts moving and you see that, you're watching your portfolio jumping up 10% every single day or more, you want to keep adding to it. You want to see it go. You want to see like everything just keep going up. You're dreaming of cars and houses and vacations and stuff.
Yeah. You're
gonna lose it all. You're in la la land, What I do is dollar cost average in every Thursday morning, regardless of what the price is. I buy $50 worth of Bitcoin. Worked out great. I've doubled my money in 6 months, and I don't stress about the price moves in it. It can fall 50% right now, and I'd still have all my money.
And you'd still be doing it every Thursday.
I'll be doing it every Thursday. Yeah, I've done the same thing with stocks. I picked out a handful of stocks, like some ETFs, some just some things that I thought would be like kind of like a broad, focus on the market. And I bought $50 worth of those every single week. And so I have the exact same amount in the stock market that I put into Bitcoin. And I'm up $43 in the stock market. And I'm up $1,200 in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just like, what a waste of time I've been putting into the stock market. But still has more. It's still part of the game, I guess.
It's all learning, it's all learning as well.
It's part of learning and being part of it, And so, I don't expect the Bitcoin to stay up at 50,000 for too much longer. I would expect that as these interest rates are rising and all the stuff going on with the treasuries, that we're probably going to end up seeing a sell-off in everything, like stocks and gold and Bitcoin and all that stuff. We're going to see a sell-off in all that stuff. The dollar's going to rally really big, and I don't know how far it'll go, but there's going to be a great buying opportunity for all that stuff when that happens. And I'll get out of my dollars and get into some Bitcoin and silver when that all takes place.
That was the last thing I was going to ask you. So sitting on cash, thumbs up for sitting on cash at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of people take cash as trash. There's a lot of there's a lot of reasons to believe that. Cash is a continual deteriorating currency. It's just like there's no doubt about it that the things that you could buy 10 years ago, you can't nearly buy as much with the same amount of dollars today. But cash also is is what you need in order to pay off your debts. Yeah. Like nothing else will do. It has to be cash. There's nothing else. And so even though it might be trash, everybody out there, if they have debts and they need to start paying those things off and there's not enough cash out there to pay them off, cash all of a sudden becomes king, and paying those things down. So when assets and all of a sudden are needed in order to start paying off debts, you need to start selling off those assets. Pretty soon those assets start selling for a lot cheaper price in order to get those dollars to pay off the debts. And that's where the people who are holding cash at the time are going to be the ones making the big bucks on it, as the picking up cheap assets that are undervalued, as people are desperate to try and, keep their debts from overwhelming them, being over leveraged and whatnot. I don't really stress myself, where things are going to go, like if the dollar is going to succeed or if silver is going to, or whatever. I just try to be there at the right time. Yeah. If everything was to fail, even still, holding cash, and they say, well, the whole system was to collapse, you're holding cash. You're in a bad shape if you're sitting in cash when the whole system collapses. But that's not true, because if you go and you read the Federal Reserve balance sheet and you look at cash itself, the Federal Reserve notes, is the first lien right to all the assets of the Federal Reserve balance sheet. So it's not bank deposits, it's not the treasuries, it's not, some other promise out there to pay. It's the folding dollars. It's the Federal Reserve notes that you have on hand that has the first lien right to the Federal Reserve balance sheet if they go bankrupt. You go and you look at their balance sheet. Now, it's not the most that they have on there, but the very first two things they list on that balance sheet are gold and then SDRs, the special drawing rights. That's the basket of world currencies out there. Mm-hmm. So cash isn't exactly trash. You know, cash is a very valuable thing. And if there's ever a time of like serious economic stress, it's the only thing.
Yeah. As much as Ray Dalio and the New World Order crew would like us to believe otherwise, but
yeah, or have us believe otherwise. It's not the case, you know. You know, I mean, you don't want to be 100% in cash, because then you don't make any interest or anything. You don't have anything, nothing happens, you know. You got to be able to, you know, take on some risk, you know, and put it out there somewhere, and hopefully that'll, you know, go up in price.
Yeah, but right now, when the greed is higher than it's ever been, that's exactly when you want to be in cash, because that's when things are about to go.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah,
that's the way I see it. Is this, you know, whenever, like I said, when everybody's talking about how awesome, like, man, housing market is so awesome, and it was just like, awesome means it's about ready to turn. That means it's at its best. That's like, you know, that's not good. You know, you want to see it like, you know, doing better than it did last year, but you don't want to see it doing like the best ever, because that's like the peak. That's
100%.
You know, we're seeing it in building materials right now. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to last, but you know, there's definitely a bubble forming in building materials right now. It's far beyond just like an inflation scenario. It's like off the charts. It's unreal.
Yeah.
And the cost of replacing a house right now, it's like, I'm noticing, like, or I'm starting to see the articles of it, where appraisals are coming in less than what it takes for the builder to build a home. You know, because of the cost of, like, the builder has to come like with an entire list of materials to say, no, this is how much it costs in materials. You need to add this in, you know, because like they go to like the other houses around, and like the price that they're selling for, they can't build them with the cost of the material at that rate. It's just gone nuts. It's not even in the room of realistic anymore. It's just completely out of bounds.
Crazy. Right, Simon, I've taken up way longer of your time than I said I would. So I really appreciate you kind of chilling, and so many different things we touched on there. All great stuff. Uneducated Economist, would you like to sign us out with your 4 words?
Oh yeah, Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.
Love it. Cheers, Simon.
Cheers.
Thanks again to Simon for coming on the show. What I'll do is I'll put links in the description below for you to be able to check out the Uneducated Economist if you're not following him already. And for more authentic conversations and challenging information relating to faith, truth, and wisdom, subscribe to the show. Much love. God bless. Keep the faith.